The Keth ship was dying at zero point 0.3 AU from the nearest relay beacon, and the only thing between it and a slow death by atmosphere bleed was a human repair dock that smelled like burnt solder and bad decisions. Prax Okafor heard the distress ping at 0214 ship time, when she was 3/4 through a diagnostic cycle on the Patchworks PDC relay and already in a bad mood about it. The ping wasn't a standard distress call. The Keth didn't do standard distress calls. What they transmitted was a formal declaration of non-interference, essentially a document informing the universe that whatever was about to happen to them was their own business, followed by a detailed navigational hazard. Notice describing their current position and drift vector, so other vessels could avoid them, while they died with dignity. Prax read the transmission twice. Then she pulled up the Keth ship's telemetry on the secondary display and looked at the hull integrity numbers and the drive output numbers and the atmosphere retention numbers. "Yuki," she said over the intercom, "get up. Bring your kit." Their medic's voice came back thick with sleep. "Please tell me it's not the coolant lines again." "It's not the coolant lines." "What is it?" "Keth diplomatic vessel. Hull breach. Drive instability. Atmosphere bleed." Prax was already at the pilot console, calculating intercept. The burn would cost them. At 0.6G sustained, they'd eat through 9% of their remaining fuel margin, which wasn't comfortable, but the math on leaving a crewed vessel to drift until its atmosphere ran out was a different kind of math, the kind Prax had learned from her father, who had fixed things for a living and raised her to understand that the universe presented you with opportunities to be useful, and you either took them or you didn't. "We're going to go help them." They transmitted a non-interference declaration. "I know. That means they don't want help." "I know what it means." Prax fired the maneuvering thrusters and felt the patchwork shiver under her hands, the old girl responding with her usual reluctant grace. "It means they'd rather die than admit they need it, which is a cultural value I respect and am going to completely ignore." The burn to intercept took 40 minutes. Prax spent most of it on the problem of docking. The Patchworks clamps were rated for UNSA standard hull geometry, and Keth vessels ran to organic curves that her systems kept trying to map as terrain features rather than docking surfaces. She pulled up everything in the ship's library on Keth hull materials, which was not much, because the Keth were not generous with structural specifications, and spent 20 minutes with a piece of actual paper working out load tolerances before she concluded that cargo straps and imagination would have to do the job that engineering had failed to provide for. "You're going to strap us to a diplomatic vessel," Yuki said from the doorway of the cockpit. She had her medkit slung over one shoulder and a bulb of coffee in her other hand, and the expression she always wore when Prax was about to do something that wasn't technically in the operations manual. "I'm going to secure us to a diplomatic vessel," Prax said. "The straps are rated for cargo. Cargo doesn't complain." The Keth ship filled the forward viewport, a sweeping structure of pale composite and dark sensor arrays that had probably been beautiful before the drive bleed had scorched a meter-wide gash along its ventral hull. Atmosphere was venting in a slow, crystalline plume that caught the light from the distant sun and scattered it into something that would have been pretty if you weren't thinking about what it meant in terms of crew survival time. Prax brought the patchwork in slow. Her hands on the controls were steady. She'd been doing this for 11 years, patching ships in places where no one else wanted to go, and her hands knew the difference between caution and fear. The first transmission from the Keth vessel came as she was maneuvering the cargo straps into position. It was a formal communication, transmitted in Alliance standard with precise diction. "Unregistered human vessel. You are approaching a vessel operating under Keth diplomatic registry. Your presence constitutes an unauthorized intrusion upon Keth sovereign space. Please withdraw to a distance of no less than 200 kilometers and await formal permission to approach, which will be transmitted upon completion of the current operational assessment." Prax keyed her comm. "How's that operational assessment going?" A pause. "The assessment is ongoing. Your hull is venting at approximately 12 liters per minute. Standard Keth crew complement for a vessel of this class is 6 to 8. At current loss rate, you've got about 4 hours of breathable atmosphere. How long does a formal assessment usually take? Another pause. Longer. Your telemetry reading is unauthorized. Sure. Prax fired the positioning thrusters and walked the first cargo strap across the Keth hull, magnetic coupling clicking home with a sound she felt through the deck. I'm Prax Okafor, independent repair tender. Who am I talking to? I am Vessel Mind Aerith, senior diplomatic envoy of the Second Keth Conclave, and you have not been given permission. I know. Prax locked the second strap. I'm coming in anyway. She cycled through the airlock with a plasma torch and a patch kit, and the particular forward momentum of someone who had decided that the question was settled and was now only interested in the work. The Keth vessel's exterior hatch took 4 minutes to convince, which was faster than she'd expected. Either the Keth had unlocked it, or their access protocols were less alien than advertised. Inside, the corridor was dim and cool, and smelled of something like ammonia mixed with ozone. Her helmet filters caught it. The atmosphere was still breathable for her, barely, which meant the breach hadn't been venting as long as the numbers suggested, or the Keth ran a richer mix than standard. At the far end of the corridor stood Vessel Mind Aerith. The Keth were bipedal, roughly the shape of something that had solved the same locomotion problems as humans but with different starting conditions. Aerith was 2.5 meters of pale carapace and articulated sensor apparatus, and the way it held itself communicated even across species lines a profound sense of something that was not quite a fence, more like cognitive difficulty, like a system encountering an input it had no parser for. You arrived, Aerith said, without being summoned. Yes. Without authorization. Also yes. This is... Aerith stopped. Started again. This is not done. Prax was already moving past it toward the sound of stressed metal and the smell of scorched composite that was coming from deeper in the ship. Show me your drive room, she said. We can talk about what's done and what isn't after I figure out if your ship is going to be here in 4 hours. Aerith followed. It had, Prax noticed, no choice. The Keth didn't have a word for jury rig. Prax was about to give them one. The drive room was a cathedral of smooth composite curves and integrated systems that had been designed, she could tell immediately, by engineers who believed in elegant solutions. Everything. Fit. Everything connected. There were no afterthought brackets, no cable bundles held with zip ties, no panels that had been recut to accommodate a replacement part that wasn't quite the right size. It was the most beautiful engine room Prax had ever wanted to take apart. It was also in catastrophic feedback. The main drive coil was cycling power back into itself through a cracked induction relay, and every cycle was building charge that the system couldn't dissipate. The Keth had a word for what happened when you couldn't dissipate that charge, and Prax suspected it was similar to the human word, which was explosion. The relay is compromised, Aerith said. It had followed her into the drive room and stood precisely 2 meters behind her, which she was starting to understand was the Keth version of giving someone space to work. The failure is complete. Replacement requires a Keth specification part, which we do not carry redundant stock of aboard a diplomatic vessel of this class. What's the relay made of? A crystalline conductor composite, with a specific resonance frequency that... what's the base material? Carbon lattice? Metal alloy? Ceramic? A pause. The primary conductor is a palladium ceramic composite. Prax opened her kit. Good enough. She had, aboard the patchwork, a secondary drive relay that was human spec and 15 years old, and had been replaced 2 months ago with a newer unit. She'd kept the old one because she kept things. Yuki called it hoarding. Prax called it inventory. The relay was not palladium ceramic. It was a copper-beryllium hybrid with different resonance characteristics and a power handling capacity that was about 60% of the Keth unit it was replacing. She pulled it from her kit and held it up and turned it over in her hands and thought about the problem the way her father had taught her to think about, problems not as a thing that had to be solved perfectly, but as a thing that had to be solved. That component, Aerith said, is not compatible. It's not optimal, Prax said. The resonance differential will reduce drive output to about 40%. I know. She was already tracing the induction pathways, looking for where the bypass would have to go. The elegant design of the Keth engine room was, from this angle, a problem everything connected to everything else, in ways that made sense aesthetically and were going to require creative thinking to work around. She pulled out her torch. 40% is enough to maneuver. 40% is enough to reach a relay station. You can get a proper repair done there. 40% functionality, Aerith said carefully, like it was trying the concept on for size and finding it several sizes too small, is not functional. Prax looked up from the access panel she was opening. By whose measure? By any standard of, you've got 4 hours of atmosphere and a drive about to go critical. Your options are 40% and alive, or 100% and debris. She turned back to the access panel. I'm picking 40%. Aerith did not respond. Prax worked. The bypass took 2 hours. She talked to herself while she worked, not to Aerith, but not ignoring it either. Just the running commentary she'd developed over a decade of solo repair work, narrating the problem as she moved through it. Here's where the current wants to go. Here's where we're going to make it go instead. This coupling isn't rated for this load, so we're going to be gentle with the throttle. This section here is going to run hot, which isn't great. But hot and working beats cool and dead every time. Aerith listened. It didn't say anything for almost 90 minutes. Then, you are cannibalizing your own vessel. Temporarily reallocating a component, Prax said. There's a difference. The difference being intent. She seated the bypass coupling and reached for the power leads. I'm going to get it back eventually. Halfway through the wiring, Yuki's voice came over the suit comm. Prax, I'm in the crew section. The Keth crew. There are 7 of them. They're in some kind of distress. Vital signs are all over the place by their standards, I think. I can't read their biology well enough to be sure. But the atmosphere mix is wrong for them. The breach has been pulling out atmosphere, and they've been topping it off with their reserve tanks, but the partial pressures are off. Ammonia balance? I think so. I don't have the specs. Prax relayed the question to Aerith without looking up from her work. After a moment, Aerith produced a technical document transmitted directly to her suit display that described Keth atmospheric requirements in more detail than she'd expected a diplomat to have memorized. She forwarded it to Yuki. Yuki's response was several seconds of silence, followed by, I can fix this. It's going to be weird. Weird how? I'm going to run the CO2 scrubber backwards through their reserve ammonia feed and use the output mix to top up the atmospheric balance. It's not how the scrubber is supposed to work. Does the scrubber know that? Not yet. The drive came back online at 43%, slightly better than Prax had projected, because the old relay had more life in it than its specifications suggested. The feedback loop died. The charge dissipation indicators dropped to safe levels. The engine room stopped smelling like it was about to become a short-lived new feature of the asteroid field. Prax sat back on her heels and looked at the work. It was ugly. Cables that didn't match. A bypass housing that was too large for the space and had to be secured with 2 bolts and a piece of structural banding she'd cut from a cargo tie. A power indicator that read suboptimal in Keth script, which Aerith had told her translated roughly to inadequate for purpose, and which Prax thought of as good enough for government work. The relay station, she said, is about 9 hours at 40% drive. You'll make it with atmosphere to spare. Yes, Aerith said. And then, you have given up your own drive redundancy to accomplish this. The patchwork has a backup. We'll be fine. You will be operating with reduced safety margins for the duration of Aerith. Prax began packing her kit. You can file a complaint when we're not drifting. The Keth diplomat was quiet for a moment. When it spoke again, its voice had shifted some quality in the tone she didn't have the cultural vocabulary to read, but which felt, in a way she couldn't entirely justify, like something that wasn't quite gratitude and wasn't quite confusion and was possibly both at once. The CO2 scrubber, it said finally. She's running it creatively, Prax said. It's a different thing. She shouldered her kit and started walking. And behind her, she heard the Keth drive cycling up, steady and quiet, and 43% alive. 2 ships, 1 working drive between them, a diplomat who had never said thank you in any language, and Prax Okafor making coffee like it was a normal Tuesday. It was not a normal Tuesday. 40 minutes after Prax got back to the patchwork, the long-range sensors picked up the debris field, a remnant cloud of shattered hull plating and frozen reaction mass from a Keth hegemony border skirmish that had happened 7 years ago and apparently hadn't finished happening yet. The cloud was drifting toward them. At current relative velocities, they had about 6 hours before the leading edge of the field reached their position, which would have been fine if the Keth vessel could maneuver properly, and fine if the patchwork still had its secondary drive relay, and fine under a number of conditions that did not currently apply. Prax looked at the navigation plot for a long time. She drank her coffee. She thought about it the way she thought about things, not panicking, because panic was for people who hadn't already spent 11 years watching ships die and figuring out how to keep them from finishing the job. Aerith, she said over the comm, I need to talk to you about your navigational software. The answer came back formal and careful. Our navigational systems are fully operational. I know, that's the problem. She pulled up the plot on the shared display. To clear the debris field before the leading edge reaches us, we need to execute a sustained burn at 1-2 G for about 40 minutes. With your drive at 43%. That burn requires precise thrust management, starting hard, tapering off as you build velocity. Then, a corrective burn on the other side. Your nav software won't do that. Silence. It won't do it, she continued. Because the input parameters fall outside operational bounds. The system is designed to refuse maneuvers. It calculates as high risk. A. 1. 2. G. Sustained burn on a drive running at 43%, with non-standard relay configuration flags as G. As inadvisable, Aerith said. Yes, I have consulted the system. The probability of drive failure during such a maneuver is calculated at 17%. I saw. Prax set down her coffee. The probability of the debris field catching us if we don't maneuver is 100%. So I need you to let me override your navigational core. The silence that followed was long enough that Prax started doing math on their remaining options, none of which were good. Then, a human has never interfaced with a Keth navigational core. There is no precedent. There's a first time for everything. The conclave, Prax said, not unkindly, is not here. We are. She looked at the debris plot. The leading edge was a slow crawl of death at this scale. I can do the burn manually. Both ships, simultaneous thrust commands, coordinated by voice between me and whoever you put on your drive controls. Your software won't fight me if I'm working through manual override rather than automated nav. It'll complain, but it'll execute. Another silence. Then, I will open the manual override interface. The setup took 90 minutes. Prax ran a cable from the Patchwork's comm system to a Keth interface adapter that Aerith produced from what appeared to be a diplomatic storage compartment. She chose not to ask why a diplomatic envoy carried hardware adapters, and established a direct voice link to the Keth drive operator. A junior crew member, named Tessic, whose voice over the comm was precise and careful and betrayed at the edges something that might have been fear. Tessic, she said. I'm going to call the burn in 3-second intervals. You match my timing. When I say hold, you hold. When I say cut, you cut. You don't wait for your software to agree. You just move. Can you do that? A pause. I can do that. Good. She had the Patchwork's throttle under her right hand and Tesic's manual override controls mapped to a secondary readout under her left. The crash couch wrapped around her. She could feel the G warning lights amber at the edge of her vision. Already strapped in, Yuki said from the crew cabin. I want it noted for the record that this plan has several obvious problems. Noted. Aerith, clear your crew to crash couches. They are secured. Prax looked at the debris plot one more time. Then, she lit the drives. The burn was brutal. 1, 2, G pushed her into the couch and stayed there. The old, continuous ache of sustained thrust that she'd learned to breathe through years ago. She called the intervals and Tesic matched her, second by second. And the two ships moved together with the ungainly coordination of a repair job that wasn't quite right, but was right enough. She could hear the Keth drive through the hull connection a different frequency than the Patchworks. Lower and smoother even at 43%, a sound she found herself listening to the way she listened to the Patchwork, reading it for stress. 17 minutes in, the debris field's leading edge reached the outer edge of their original position. They were not there anymore. 30 minutes in, a piece of hull plating the size of a cargo container tumbled through the space they'd been occupying 6 minutes ago. 38 minutes in, the Patchwork took a hit. Not the container, something smaller. A fragment that came off a larger piece that was itself tumbling through the outer field. It hit the portside hull with a sound like a hammer on a bell, and for a half-second every alarm on the board lit up and Prax's hands were already moving before the board finished telling her what had happened. Hull dent. No breach. The plate had flexed and held. She laughed. It came out of her before she thought about it, a short, sharp laugh that was mostly relief and a little adrenaline, and the absurdity of finding the whole situation funny. Aerith's voice came over the comm immediately. Okafor, report your status. We're fine. Hull dent, no breach. We're fine. You. A pause. You made a sound. I laughed. Silence. Then, explain. Yuki answered from the back before Prax could. Because it didn't kill us, she said. When something almost kills you and doesn't, sometimes humans laugh. It means we're okay. The debris field's leading edge swept past them. The burn continued. 43 minutes after she'd lit the drives, Prax called the cutoff and felt the blessed absence of thrust, the sudden lightness of 0G returning as the drives went quiet. The two ships floated in clear space. Behind them, the debris field continued its slow tumble through the void. Prax checked the plot, checked the hull readings, checked the Keth drive telemetry still running, still at 43%. A little warm but within tolerance. She unstrapped from the couch and pulled herself to the forward viewport and looked out at the stars and the distant bulk of the Keth vessel hanging against them, hull still scorched, drive still running suboptimal, absolutely and entirely alive. Aerith, she said, you make it to the relay station from here at your current drive output. Straightforward burn. Nothing tricky. 9 hours. A long pause. When Aerith spoke, there was something in its voice. She couldn't name some quality that hadn't been there at the beginning of this long, strange day. Okafor, I have transmitted a full report to the Second Keth Conclave regarding this incident. All right. I have described your actions as another pause, as non-standard. That's fair. I have also formally requested that the Conclave establish a diplomatic interface with human independent repair operations. A beat. Specifically with your vessel. Prax raised an eyebrow. Why? Because, Aerith said, and she could hear it working through the words carefully, like each one required individual consideration. The Keth Conclave has Over 6 centuries of interstellar operation, developed a comprehensive model of vessel performance, crew behavior, and crisis response. That model has proved accurate for every species we have encountered. A pause. You have required me to file 14 separate exceptions in the last 8 hours. The conclave does not respond well to exceptions. What does the conclave want to do about it? They want to understand it. And then, I want to understand it. Prax thought about that. She pulled herself back to the pilot console and started running the numbers on the course to the relay station. They could escort the Keth vessel. The fuel margin was thin but workable. 9 hours was a long time, and they could probably eat something and sleep in shifts. Aerith, she said, we'll take you in. Escort, in case anything else breaks. That is not necessary, I know. Do you want it anyway? The silence was shorter this time. Yes. Then we're going. She was already running the calculations, her hands moving across the console with the ease of long practice. Fuel margin, thrust timing, relative velocity, the math of keeping 2 ships together across 9 hours of space. It was fine. It was workable. It was 43% of optimal, and she'd take it. Yuki came forward and handed her a fresh bulb of coffee without being asked, and Prax took it and drank it and looked out at the stars and the battered Keth ship and felt, not for the first time, the particular satisfaction of work that needed doing and had been done. The Patchwork's drives came up quiet and steady. Ahead of them, the Keth vessel matched thrust. 2 ships, moving together, bound for the relay station and a proper repair dock and whatever came after. The hull dent would need to be seen to eventually. The secondary drive relay was still on the Keth ship. The fuel margins were uncomfortable and would stay that way until they reached the station. Prax Okafor drank her coffee and flew her ship. That was enough.